I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I'm not the kind of person who believes in the paranormal. I'm a forest ranger, have been for 12 years, and I've spent more nights alone in the wilderness than most people spend in their own beds. I've seen bears, I've tracked mountain lions, I've even stumbled across illegal grow operations that could have gotten me killed. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened during my rotation at Pinewood Station in October of 2019. Pinewood Station isn't on any public map. It's a backcountry ranger cabin about 18 miles deep into the Cascade Wilderness, accessible only by a hiking trail that takes most people 2 days to complete. The Forest Service maintains it for rangers doing extended patrols, wildlife surveys, that sort of thing. It's basically a one-room structure with a wood stove, a cot, a table, and a radio that works maybe 60% of the time. No electricity, no running water, just you, the forest, and whatever thoughts you bring with you. I volunteered for the October rotation because I needed the overtime, and honestly, I liked the solitude. My divorce had just finalized, and the idea of spending 2 weeks completely alone sounded better than facing another weekend in my empty apartment. I packed my gear, loaded up on supplies, and hit the trail on October 3rd. The weather forecast called for rain, lots of it, but that didn't bother me. I'd weathered worse. The hike in was uneventful. Beautiful, actually. The aspens were turning gold, and there was that crisp smell in the air that only comes in early autumn. I made good time and reached the cabin by late afternoon on the second day. The place looked exactly as I remembered it. Weathered logs, a stone chimney, a covered porch with a stack of firewood that the last ranger had left behind. I did my standard check. No animal intrusions, no damage, supplies intact. Everything was fine. That first night, I settled in. Got a fire going in the stove, heated up some chili, and sat at the table making notes in the patrol log. The rain started around 8 o'clock, a steady drumming sound on the metal roof that was actually pretty soothing. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be dry and warm while the forest got soaked outside. I turned in early, maybe 9:30, and fell asleep listening to the rain. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Now, let me be clear about something. When you spend as much time in the wilderness as I do, you learn to distinguish sounds. Animals move in specific ways. Raccoons scurry. Deer are careful, deliberate. Bears are heavy, unmistakable. These footsteps were human, slow, measured, moving from one end of the porch to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I lay there in the darkness, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cabin was completely black, no moon that night, and the clouds were thick with rain. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear those footsteps clearly, even over the sound of the downpour. They'd walk to the left side of the porch, pause, then walk back to the right, over and over. My mind raced through possibilities. Another ranger? No, nobody else was scheduled to be in this sector. A hiker? Possible, but who the hell would be out in this weather in the middle of the night? And why wouldn't they knock? I grabbed my flashlight from beside the cot, but didn't turn it on yet. I waited, listening. After maybe 5 minutes, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence except for the rain. I counted to 60, then to 60 again. Nothing. Finally, I got up, moved to the window, and looked out. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the porch, the clearing beyond, the tree line. Empty. Nothing but rain and shadows. I checked the door, still locked from the inside, the deadbolt exactly as I'd left it. I did a full perimeter check with my flashlight, walking around the entire cabin, but there were no footprints, no disturbances in the mud, nothing. The rain was coming down so hard it would have washed away tracks quickly, I told myself. That's all it was. But I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat at the table with my flashlight and my service weapon within reach, listening to the rain and waiting for those footsteps to return. They didn't. Not that night. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Stress from the divorce, maybe some dream that felt real. Your mind does strange things in the backcountry. I spent the day doing trail maintenance and checking equipment caches, normal ranger stuff. The rain never let up, but I was dressed for it. By the time I got back to the cabin that evening, I was soaked through and exhausted. I got another fire going, dried out my gear, and made myself some coffee. As I sat there warming my hands on the cup, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the table, carved into the wood, were words. They were old, the carved lines darkened with years of grime, but they were legible. Don't answer when he knocks. I stared at those words for a long time. How had I missed them the night before? I'd been sitting at this same table, writing in the patrol log right where this carving was, but I was certain I hadn't seen it then. I grabbed the patrol log and flipped back through the entries. Most were mundane: weather conditions, wildlife sightings, maintenance notes. But then, about 15 pages back, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was from a ranger named Marcus Chen, dated September of the previous year. His entry was brief. Heard someone walking outside last night, didn't see anyone, feeling uneasy, will investigate tomorrow. The next day's entry was even shorter. Moving to a different sector, can't stay here. There were no entries from Marcus after that. I flipped forward and found notes from other rangers. Apparently, Marcus had requested a transfer to a different district entirely and had left the Forest Service not long after. Nobody knew why. I tried the radio, but the weather was interfering too much. All I got was static. I was completely alone, 18 miles from the nearest trailhead, with no way to communicate, and a growing certainty that something was very, very wrong with this place. That second night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I sat at the table with every light source I had: flashlight, headlamp, lantern, all burning at once. The cabin glowed like a tiny island in an ocean of darkness and rain. I kept my eyes on the door, my ears straining over the sound of the downpour. The footsteps came back at 1:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was checking my watch obsessively. Same as before. Slow, deliberate, pacing from one end of the porch to the other. But this time, they were heavier, more insistent. And then, after maybe 10 minutes of this endless pacing, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, pause, 3 more. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just stared at that door, at the deadbolt that was definitely locked, and listened. Another 3 knocks, harder this time. And then a voice. Male, low, almost conversational. I know you're in there. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to call out and ask who it was, to do something. But I remembered those carved words on the table. Don't answer when he knocks. The voice came again. Open the door. I'm cold. I'm so cold. There was something wrong with the voice. It sounded off, like someone trying to remember how human speech worked. The cadence was too slow, the tone too flat. The doorknob rattled, once, twice, then violently, like someone was trying to rip it off, but the deadbolt held. The door shook in its frame, and I watched in frozen horror as the old wood creaked and bowed, but it didn't break. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The rattling, the voice, even the footsteps, just the rain again, hammering on the roof. I don't know how long I sat there, too terrified to move. Eventually, the sky began to lighten. That pale, gray, pre-dawn glow. I waited until I could see clearly before I finally approached the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the deadbolt. When I opened it, the porch was empty, but there, in the center of the weathered planks, was a single muddy handprint. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow, and it was facing the wrong way, as if whoever left it had been standing on the inside of the door, pressing out. I packed my gear in 15 minutes. I didn't care about protocol, didn't care about finishing my rotation. I just had to get out of there. As I locked the cabin door behind me and started down the trail, I looked back once. Just once. There was a figure standing in the tree line. Tall, impossibly thin, watching me. Even from that distance, I could tell its proportions were all wrong. Too tall for the way it was standing, arms hanging just a little too low. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran the entire 18 miles back to civilization, only stopping when I physically couldn't continue. I made it to my truck by early afternoon, got cell service about an hour later, and called it in. Told them there was a medical emergency, that I needed to be replaced immediately. They sent someone else to finish my rotation. A newer ranger named Sarah, who I barely knew. She lasted 2 nights before radioing for emergency extraction. She wouldn't say what happened, but I saw her a month later at a training event. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. When I tried to ask her about Pinewood Station, she just shook her head and walked away. The Forest Service sealed the cabin after that. Officially, they said it was due to structural issues and black mold. Unofficially, I've heard rumors that I'm not the first ranger to experience something at Pinewood. There are stories going back decades, whispers of something that lives in that part of the forest, something that's drawn to solitary places and the people who occupy them. I transferred to a different district. I don't do backcountry rotations anymore. I stick to day patrols, populated areas, places where I'm never more than an hour from help. And on rainy nights, when I'm lying in bed and I hear the downpour on my roof, sometimes, just sometimes, I hear those footsteps again, slow, measured, pacing back and forth. And I remember that voice. I know you're in there. I've done a lot of thinking about what happened. Was it real? Was it some kind of shared delusion that affects people in that specific location? Was there actually something out there, or did the isolation and the darkness create something inside our own minds? I don't know. And honestly, I don't want to know. What I do know is this. There are places in the deep wilderness where humans aren't meant to be alone. Places where something else has claimed territory, and we're just visitors who've overstayed our welcome. Pinewood Station is one of those places. If you're ever offered a rotation there, if the Forest Service ever reopens that cabin, do yourself a favor. Say no. And if you ever find yourself in a backcountry cabin and you hear footsteps outside in the middle of a rainy night, don't answer when he knocks. Let me tell you about the worst job I ever had. And I don't mean worst in the way most people complain about their jobs. Bad pay, annoying coworkers, boring tasks. I mean worst in the sense that it changed something fundamental in me. After what happened during my 3 months working the night shift at Pineview Rest Stop, I don't see the world the same way anymore. This was back in 2017. I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in English literature and absolutely no idea what to do with my life. I'd moved back in with my parents in rural Pennsylvania, and the shame of that was eating me alive. So when I saw a posting for a rest stop attendant, overnight shift, decent pay, minimal supervision, I jumped at it. Anything to get out of the house and feel like a functioning adult. Pineview Rest Stop sits on Interstate 79, about 40 miles north of Pittsburgh. If you've ever driven that stretch of highway, you might have stopped there. It's one of those old-style rest areas from the 70s. A squat brick building with restrooms, vending machines, a few picnic tables under a pavilion outside, and a small attendance office. During the day, it's busy enough. Truckers, families on road trips, people needing a quick bathroom break. But at night, from midnight to 6 a.m. when I worked, it was a different place entirely. My supervisor was a guy named Dale, maybe 60 years old, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. He trained me for exactly 1 shift, showed me how to mop the floors, restock the vending machines, clean the restrooms every 2 hours, and keep the coffee pot filled. Easy work. Mindless work. As he was leaving that first night, ready to hand the shift over to me, he paused at the door. The rain was just starting then, a light drizzle that would become a constant companion during my time there. "Kid, you're gonna see some weird shit on the overnight," he said, not looking at me. "Just ignore it." I laughed. "What, like ghosts?" He didn't laugh back. "Just ignore it. Do your job, mind your business, and you'll be fine. People come through here at night. They're not always right in the head. Tired, drunk, high, whatever. You see someone acting strange, you stay in the office. Lock the door if you have to. Don't engage." "Got it," I said, not really taking him seriously. I figured he was talking about the occasional aggressive drunk or someone having a mental health crisis. I could handle that. Dale left, and I was alone. The first few hours were exactly as boring as you'd expect. I cleaned the bathrooms, which were surprisingly gross for only being 2 hours dirty. I restocked the Coke machine. I sat in the office playing games on my phone and occasionally watching the security monitors that showed feeds from 4 cameras, one on the parking lot, one in each restroom hallway, and one covering the vending machine area. Around 2:30 a.m., a semi-truck pulled in. I watched on the monitor as the driver got out, a big guy in a flannel shirt and trucker cap. He used the restroom, bought a coffee from the machine, and sat at one of the inside benches to drink it. Normal. After about 15 minutes, he left. The parking lot was empty again. That's when I noticed something odd. On the monitor showing the men's restroom hallway, there was someone standing just at the edge of the frame. I could only see part of them, a shoulder, maybe part of a head. They weren't moving. I frowned, checking the parking lot feed. Empty, no cars, no trucks, so who had I just seen? I got up from the desk and walked out into the main area. The building was laid out in a simple rectangle. Entrance in the middle, men's room to the left, women's room to the right, vending machines and benches straight ahead, and my office in the back corner. Everything was fluorescent lit and echoing empty. "Hello? Is anybody there?" No response. I walked toward the men's restroom hallway, my footsteps loud on the tile floor. When I reached it, there was nobody there. Both hallways were empty. I checked both restrooms, all the stalls, even behind the doors. There's nothing. I went back to the office and looked at the monitor again. The hallway was empty now. Had I imagined it? Maybe it was just a glitch in the feed, some artifact of the old camera system. I made a mental note to mention it to Dale and tried to forget about it. But 20 minutes later, it happened again. Same monitor, same location. A figure, just at the edge of the frame. This time I could see more. It looked like a woman, or someone with long dark hair, wearing what might have been a dark dress or coat. Just standing there, perfectly still. I immediately looked at the parking lot feed, still empty. No vehicles had pulled in. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was another glitch, but I knew I had to check. I grabbed my phone, suddenly very aware that I was alone in this building in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning, and went out into the main area again. "Hello? The rest stop is open, but if you need help, you need to let me know." Nothing. I walked to the women's restroom hallway this time. Empty. I hesitated, then knocked on the women's restroom door. "Anyone in here? I'm the attendant. I need to check the facility." There's silence. I pushed the door open and went inside. It was a standard rest stop bathroom, 4 stalls, sinks, paper towel dispensers, that industrial soap smell mixed with artificial air freshener. All the stall doors were open, all were empty. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made me freeze. On the mirror above the sinks, written in what looked like condensation, were 2 words: "Stay inside." I stared at those words, watching as they slowly faded, the moisture evaporating in the dry restroom air. My hands were shaking. Had those been there when I came in? Had I just not noticed? Or had something written them while I was checking the stalls? I backed out of the restroom and practically ran back to the office. I locked the door this time, which felt ridiculous but also necessary. I watched the monitors obsessively, but for the next hour nothing happened. A few cars pulled in. Normal people, quick bathroom breaks, in and out. I stayed in the office and let them come and go without incident. Around 4:30 a.m., the rain picked up significantly, and I could hear it hammering on the roof, and the sound was oddly comforting, like the building was cocooning me from the storm outside. I was starting to relax, thinking maybe the weirdness was over for the night, when the parking lot feed showed a car pulling in. It was an old sedan, maybe from the 90s, dark-colored and beat-up looking. It parked in a spot close to the building, but nobody got out. I watched for 5 minutes, then 10. The car just sat there, engine apparently off, windows dark. Finally, the driver's door opened. A woman got out. At least, I thought it was a woman. It was hard to tell in the grainy night vision quality of the camera. She was wearing a long coat or dress, dark, and she moved strangely. Her gait was off, jerky, like she was injured or intoxicated. She walked toward the building, and I lost sight of her as she moved under the entrance overhang. I switched to the interior cameras, waiting to see which door she'd come through. But she didn't come in. Minutes passed. I checked all the cameras. The parking lot showed her car door still open. The interior cameras showed empty hallways and the vacant vending machine area. Where had she gone? And then I heard it. A sound that gave me goosebumps. A sound of scratching. It was coming from the wall behind me. The office where I sat backed up to the outside wall of the building. There was a window, but I'd closed the blinds hours ago. Now something was scratching at that wall. Not the window, but the brick itself. Long, deliberate scraping sounds like fingernails on stone. I sat frozen at the desk, too terrified to move. The scratching continued, moving slowly from left to right, then back again, and then it stopped. A face appeared at the window. I say face, but that's not quite accurate. I could see it through the gaps in the blinds, pale, too pale, with dark hollows where the eyes should be and a mouth that was open way too wide. It was pressed against the glass, and I could hear breathing, wet, raspy breathing that fogged up the window from the outside. "Let me in," a voice whispered. It sounded like it was coming from right next to my ear, even though the face was outside, separated from me by glass and blinds. "Please, I'm so cold. I'm so wet. Let me in." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared at that distorted shape through the blinds, watching as it pressed closer to the glass. Let me in. The door handle to my office rattled. I'd locked it. Thank God I'd locked it. But now something was trying to get in from the main area of the building. How was that possible? The thing was outside, at the window. Unless there was more than one. The handle rattled more violently. Then something slammed against the door. Once, twice, 3 times. The cheap, hollow core door shook in its frame. All the while, that face stayed at the window, that impossible mouth hanging open, and the whisper continued, "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." I dove under the desk and called 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. 911, what's your emergency? "I'm at the Pineview rest stop on I-79, I gasped out. "There's someone trying to break into the office. I'm the night attendant. I'm alone here. Please send someone." "Sir, can you describe the person? Are they armed?" I don't know. I can't see clearly. They're at the window and the door. Please, just send someone." "Officers are on the way. Stay on the line with me. Are you in a secure location?" "I'm in the office. The door is locked, but..." The pounding stopped. Suddenly, completely, everything went silent except for the rain and my own panicked breathing. "Sir, are you still there?" "Yeah," I whispered. "It stopped. Whatever it was, it stopped." "Stay where you are until officers arrive. They're about 10 minutes out." I stayed under that desk for the longest 10 minutes of my life. The 911 operator kept talking to me, keeping me calm, but all I could do was stare at that door and that window, waiting for something to come crashing through. When the state police finally arrived, they found the building empty, except for me. The car that had pulled in was gone. No sign of it on the cameras, just disappeared. They checked the exterior of the building and found scratches on the brick outside my office window. Deep gouges in the stone, like someone had taken a knife or maybe their fingernails and just dragged them across the surface over and over. Animal, probably, one of the officers said, but he didn't sound convinced. Maybe a bear or something trying to get to the trash. The trash was on the other side of the building. They stayed with me until my shift ended at 6 a.m. I filed a report, though I left out some of the details. The face, the whispers, the way the woman had moved. I knew how crazy it sounded. I came back the next night because I needed the money and because I was young and stupid and convinced myself it had been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation. Dale didn't ask me about it, even though he must have heard about the police being called. The second night was quiet, normal. People came and went, I did my duties, nothing strange happened. I started to relax. The third night I found something in the women's restroom during my 2 a.m. cleaning round. Stuffed behind the toilet in the last stall, wrapped in a trash bag, were clothes. A dark dress, soaking wet even though it had been there for who knows how long. And wrapped inside the dress was a driver's license. The photo showed a young woman, maybe 30, with long dark hair and a tired smile. The name read Jennifer Costas. The license had been issued in 1989. I took it to my office and, after debating with myself, looked her name up on my phone. It took a while, but I finally found something. A newspaper article from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, dated October 1989. A woman found dead at I-79 rest stop. Jennifer Costas, 32, had been found in her vehicle at Pineview rest stop on a rainy October night. Cause of death: carbon monoxide poisoning. She'd pulled over during a storm, exhausted from a long drive, and fell asleep with the engine running. A tragic accident. But here's what made my blood run cold. The article mentioned that her body had been discovered by the night attendant at approximately 4:30 a.m., the same time that car had pulled into the lot during my first night shift. I kept working there for another 2.5 months. I needed the money, and the job was actually quite easy. Most nights were completely normal. But every week or two, always on a rainy night, I'd see her on the monitors. Sometimes just standing in the hallway. Sometimes at the edge of the parking lot. Sometimes pressed against the window of my office. I learned to recognize the signs. When the rain picked up around 4 a.m., I'd lock myself in the office and ignore whatever I saw on the screens. I'd hear the scratching, the whispers, the pounding, but I never opened the door. I never let her in. Other things happened too. I'd find wet footprints leading from the women's restroom to nowhere. They'd just stop in the middle of the floor. Sometimes the vending machines would turn on by themselves, all the buttons lighting up at once. Once, I found every stall door in the men's room locked from the inside, even though the restroom was empty. The worst was the night I heard crying coming from inside one of the stalls in the women's restroom, deep, heaving sobs like someone in absolute despair. I stood outside the stall door, the only one that was closed, and listened to those heartbroken sounds for almost 20 minutes. I wanted to help, wanted to ask if whoever it was needed assistance, but I remembered Dale's words. Don't engage. When I finally got the courage to look under the stall door, there was nobody inside. But the crying continued for another 10 minutes before fading away. I quit in January. Told Dale I was moving out of state for another job, which was a lie. I just couldn't do it anymore. The money wasn't worth what it was doing to my mental health. I couldn't sleep during the day because I'd lie awake remembering that face at the window, those wet, raspy breaths, that voice begging me to let it in. Dale wasn't surprised. As I turned in my keys and uniform shirt, he just nodded. How long did you last? 3 months. That's pretty good. Most people don't make it past one. How long did you work overnights? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. 5 years, before they moved me to days. Why did you keep doing it? Because something needs to keep watch, he said quietly. Someone needs to be here to make sure the building is maintained, to keep the lights on. If we closed it down, if we abandoned it, I think she'd start showing up other places, following people home maybe. At least here she stays contained. I think about that sometimes. The idea that Jennifer Costas is trapped there, endlessly reliving the worst night of her life, pulling into that rest stop cold and wet and exhausted, forever seeking warmth and shelter that she'll never find. And someone needs to be there, to witness it, to keep the lights on and the doors locked and make sure she doesn't spread beyond that one cursed location. I drive that stretch of I-79 sometimes. I have to. It's the main route north from Pittsburgh, and I always pass Pineview Rest Stop without stopping, even if I desperately need a bathroom or coffee. As I drive by at 70 miles per hour, I sometimes glance over and see the building lit up in the darkness, and I wonder who's working the night shift now. I wonder if they've seen her yet, and I wonder if they're smart enough to stay inside when she asks to be let in.